All right, well, Lou, welcome to Tell Your Story at the Story House.
Okay, thank you. A Story at the Story House is a great name.
Yeah, here we go. So you've been a part of Alhambra for a long time. How did
Right.
that first come to be?
Um, when I was born in 1943, Dad was overseas during World War II. And actually, I was 2 years old by the time the war ended and he got back. And then he continued his work at Purdue University. He'd graduated there in June of 1941 with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. And he'd been in ROTC, so he was in the Army Reserves, got called up immediately after Pearl Harbor, and wound up commanding an African American company before they desegregated the Army, and was his outfit was shipped over to work on the carrying supplies and stuff on the Lido Road, opening a land route to China in Burma during World War II. And when the war was finally over, by the time, because you were over till the war was over, there was none of this 6 month rotation and come back kind of thing. And so I remember going down, meeting him at the train station there. They took me down to meet him, and I didn't know who this guy was, but I was sure fascinated by the steam locomotives that huffed and puffed and made a lot of smoke and everything. At any rate, he went back to work, back to school on the GI Bill, got his doctorate in structural engineering, and at Purdue on his doctoral committee was Dr. Charles Ellis, the man who's now been finally fully, firmly credited as being the designer of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, wow.
And but the only bridge my dad ever got to have anything to do with was one that has the word the Alhambra on it that goes over Fremont from CF Braun to its parking lot on the other
Oh,
side. All the
interesting.
other stuff
Okay.
was different kinds of things, a lot of petroleum sort of stuff, engineering and all.
So he worked at CF Braun.
He worked at CF Braun, and
Okay.
that's how we got out here. And we came out here in, must have been late 1950. My brother Tom, born in November 1950, was, I remember when we came out, it was pretty cold, and they had to have the little duck toilet seat for him to sit on so he could poop by the side of the road coming out. Everything is all long drive. And so at any rate, we first rented a house right across from Granada Park on the west side of Granada Park there. And I remember I was in second grade at the time. I remember I had to walk across the dirt construction for the 10 freeway. They'd been grading it, but they hadn't paved it or anything, to go to Fremont School in the second grade there. And then later, Dad was able to buy a home on South Sierra Vista, 1212 South Sierra Vista, just a little bit north of Valley, on the east side of the street. And had this big old tree in it that my grandfather on my mother's side used to, my mother's father, um, used to call a monkey puzzle tree. I had spent my first 2 years on their farm in Indiana. Uh, uh, the McClintock's, grandpa and grandma had a farm there, but it wasn't really so much a commercial farm. They had chickens, pigs, horses, all kinds of stuff there, grew fruit crops. Um, but he was by that time, when he was a kid, he had to drop out of school. And he had to, his father had been an engineer, not train engineer, but engineer designing things on the railroad, and been killed in a tunnel accident. And they family had hired Clarence Darrow, the famous lawyer,
Hmm.
sue the railroad and everything. I don't know how it ever came out or anything, but they wound up living in a utopian socialist community in Michigan.
So this is your grandfather.
That's my grandfather on
Okay.
my mother's side,
Okay.
yeah. And he trapped mink for a living for a while and everything, and eventually got a job at the university. Finally started taking some classes, got his doctorate in horticulture when he was 55. And remember, he published all kinds of books about the spray chemicals and spray chemical applicators, about the glories of DDT and everything in those days, before they knew much about the effects of it. But I remember going out, he would go out to in the backyard. He had like 50 different kinds of pears growing on a pear tree. So he taught me how to bud graft and everything, where you make the little cross slice in there and put the other little piece in and wrap it up with a rubber band and everything, so you can grow different kinds of plants on the same tree. And remember going out with him to the orchards and everything, the university's orchards there. At any rate, when we moved out here, that was the first time we moved out here. Like I say, we were in this house right across the street from Granada Park. There was one point where Mom took the picture. Dad had all three kids. I'm the oldest. Andy and Tom are the two younger brothers. We were all in our Purdue University little T-shirts, all lined up, one stacked up above another there on the park and everything. The Korean War was on at that time, and I remember one of the things that I had to do was, there was some deal where they were using grease and fats in the war production, or some munitions or something like that was involved with it. But Mom would save all the old grease, the bacon grease and everything, and put it in a cottage cheese container, and I would take it over to this little market that was right by Fremont School, and they turn it in there, and you get 2 cents a pound for it. And not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Let me ask,
Yeah.
were there other families from Indiana that you recall?
I don't remember. There were quite a few people from the Midwest. After the war, I'm sure there were many people relocating here. I do remember a little bit later when we moved to Sierra Vista, the house there, and Dad built it had a pretty good sized backyard, and Dad built this 2-story sort of kid clubhouse. It was really more on the upstairs. You'd have to climb up the ladder to get in it and everything. And we didn't have a dryer, so I remember we had to hang all the clothes on the dryer and everything.
Were there a lot of kids in the neighborhood?
Oh, yeah, yeah. The place was just crawling with kids. Alhambra, right after World War II, it was just tons of kids.
A lot of families from out of town, or
I
homegrown?
don't know where they were all from, but a lot of the construction of housing was relatively new. A lot of it was post-World War II in there. The Sierra Vista, that was an older house. But later, when we lived at 1021 South Cordova, when I was in, let's see, that was after we came back from, well, I was there at Fremont School in the second grade, half of the second grade. Then we wound up being, while we were still living at that house, we went to Martha Baldwin School once we got the house at 1212 South Sierra Vista. And there were a lot of kids there. I don't know where they were all from. I do remember certain things at that time that you wouldn't see today. Kids who had leg braces because they had polio and stuff like that. So it's interesting to see all the present day stuff with going on about anti-vaccination stuff. Well, it was we were so glad to get the vaccines at that time because it was these were very debilitating diseases. And so I was at Martha Baldwin School in third, fourth, and the first half of fifth grade. And I remember Ms. Goff, Ms. Prince, and Mr. Howell were my teachers. You know, in those days, you were with the same teacher every day. You really remember them. It's not like later when you're in high school or something and you see them for an hour a day or something.
Right.
So you really got to know them. And I remember one of the first things when I was at Martha Baldwin School, we had a field trip to the Southwest Indian Museum in Highland Park.
Mm-hmm.
And the car was in, got a flat tire on the way down there. And of course, it's hard to pull over on the Pasadena Freeway, as it was known at that time, Arroyo Seco Parkway now. But, the things were fascinating. They had exhibits there that you don't have now. Of course, now it's been taken over by the Autry, and a lot of the stuff has been shifted to the Autry. But they had the Indian mummies on display there. And then later in the 60s, early 70s, the American Indian movement had demonstrations outside the Southwest Museum and said, well, either bury our ancestors or we're going to dig up some white folks and put them on display. So they finally took mummies off display.
Wow. Okay.
And everything. But I remember when they would have parent conferences at Martha Baldwin School, the auditorium was just packed. It was standing room only. I mean, the parents were very, very involved in everything at that time. I imagine, I don't know what the enrollment is now at the school compared to what it was then. I know the baby boom has busted. And I know most school districts are suffering somewhat of a decline in enrollment these days, this being 2026. And you just don't, every kid, every home had a kid in it. When we lived there later, we were after the fifth grade, we were still living on Sierra Vista at that time. Mr. Howell had a little stamp club, I remember, for collecting postage stamps. And the kids would stay after school for that. It was very interesting. And then in the middle of fifth grade, Dad took a teaching job at Northwestern. We were back there for a year and a half, 2 years.
Let me interrupt.
Yeah.
So, did you do postage stamp collection, or did you participate in that?
Yeah. I started collecting, and then I did it for a while as a kid. And then, of course, when you get away to college and stuff, all those things tend to go by the side. But I picked it up later, and I still do some.
Okay. Yeah, my grandfather collected stamps, and it seems to me like that's not as common of a hobby today as it was in the past.
No.
Do you know why that is?
I think there's so many other things to do. First off, if you didn't have a lot of money, that's how you got communications, and the communications usually came with a stamp on the letter. So you got a free supply coming in all the time. And I remember living back briefly when Dad was teaching at Northwestern in Illinois, in Evanston there. We rented half of an old house from the university, and right across the alley was the admissions building. And they'd throw out all the stuff, and I'd go over and go through the stuff, and they still had what was known as the presidential series from 1938 and all that, and you still got some of that. In the early 50s, you got what was known as the Liberty series. And so that was beginning to come in too. But I get lots of stamps from just the stuff they were throwing out in their big trash bins and stuff. So it was very easy, and we had we rented out the room on the third floor to Mr. Angelos, who was studying at Northwestern. He was in from Greece. I don't know what he was studying or anything, but he used to get letters from Greece. So I'd get some Greek stamps and things like that. It was I don't think it was a big thing where kids were in it for any monetary interest or anything that much. It was just really interesting to
like a way to connect to the world, maybe the broader world.
And I remember one thing that kind of got me into it, even before the stamp club, I think, but the stamp club really kind of got me into it later. One of my dad's old professors had given me as a gift a little packet of used stamps. I don't know, 25 used stamps from the world. There'd be old Greek statues with the arms off and stuff like that. It was just fascinating to see these things. And then when we got to Mr. Howell's Stamp Club, he worked out something with Mr. Winkler. Mr. Winkler was a stamp dealer, and he had a little room in the back of Owl Drug. Now, Owl Drug was, as I recall, on Garfield, just a little bit south of Main Street there, no longer around. But he rented a little room in back there from them, and he had his little stamp store in there, and he'd get in a big bag, several kilos of stamps, known as kiloware, just where people would clip these things off and sold them by the pound or the kilo, and mostly from Europe, as I recall, the stuff that he had. And he'd let the kids from the stamp club, we would soak the stamps off, and for every 10 we soaked, we get to keep one, and so forth. So there were little deals like that going on. And yeah, it was interesting. You learned a lot about the world. You learned a lot about geography. You learned a little bit of language and stuff like that too. But in geography, you learned a lot about. And you learned about British Empire, and all the British Empire would have the kings and queens of England's heads on them and so forth. In those days, now it's a little different, but it was a fun thing to do. And I remember when a new stamp would come out, and this was later, after we were, like I say, we were back in Evanston for 2 years. And Dad was teaching civil engineering at Northwestern then. And we, in fact, when Dad was here, before we moved back there for that short 1.5 year, 2 year period, Dad, up through about the middle of the Korean War, he was still in the reserves after the war, and then finally resigned his commission because it was going to get very difficult if he got called up. I think the 40th National Guard unit was sent to Korea from California, and but for his 2 weeks of service that she had to do in the National Guard during the summer, they weren't going to just have him go out and march around. They sent him back to be a substitute teacher at West Point. So he got to do that and so forth. But at any rate,
let me ask about his time at CF Braun. What years did he work there?
Yeah, it's I don't have all the details. I remember that old man Braun was a real bug about keeping everything real neat. If you were leaving papers on your desk at night, he went in and he saw them there, they'd be in the wastebasket.
Did your dad tell you any stories about that?
Yeah, he mentioned it a couple of times. So you had to have everything neat and put away at the end of the day. And,
I wish I had someone like that for my desk. The spirit of CF Braun.
Yeah, right. But you go by those buildings, they're still beautiful. And I got to say, the people who later bought them and kept them up have done a great job of preserving those buildings. They're really fabulous. And they put the butterfly garden in and everything there too, to
So what did your father design there?
Well, I'm not too sure. It mostly wasn't structures. A lot of their stuff was related to petroleum and
like
refining.
Equipment.
Yeah, so it was a lot of equipment stuff. If you see the pictures, they still had the shops then. And you see the pictures, and there's a little old book on Alhambra, and it shows a bunch of those massive catalytic converter units coming out of their shops there. And these would require extra long trailer loads and everything to take these massive pieces of equipment that were coming out of there. And then later, I remember after C.F. Braun, Dad worked for another outfit down in Santa Fe Springs, and that was very petroleum related also. But that was what was going on in those days. And
how about your mother?
My mom, she had she was in college. That's where she and Dad met, was in college at Purdue. And when the war came and Dad was out here, Dad sent her a message, come on out and let's get married. And I remember her talking to her dad about that, and he said, well, if you want to do it, go ahead, but you got to stay with him. If he's badly wounded or something, you make a commitment to stick by him and everything, and so she did come out, and they were stationed out by San Bernardino, and they actually got married out that way at a church out there during the war, and then they were later up around the San Luis Obispo area and eventually shipped overseas. At first, they were going to put my dad in because he had civil engineering experience, surveying, all this kind of stuff, they were going to have him do graves registration in North Africa or something, laying out the plots and everything there. But then he wound up with this task leading this, it was in the Army Corps of Engineers unit, but it was basically a truck transport outfit. But Mom had been, she won some trophy for poetry and stuff like that there. And she did a little bit of substitute teaching later, but basically after the war, she was pretty much house mom and raising kids and that kind of stuff. And very much involved with those kind of things, but I don't remember her being involved in civic activities or anything like that. And my dad was pretty much, with us and with the kids, and that's pretty much, you got 3 kids, that's pretty much full-time job there. Yeah.
So you said you remember when they were building the 10 freeway.
Yeah.
How old were you when that was happening?
Must have been about 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have memories of before they started building it?
No, because when it was already under construction when we came out.
Okay.
And it must have been about 1950. I was born in November 13th, 1943, and second grade, I would have been about 7 years old. So that's about when we came out.
Any particular memories of that construction that you recall?
I remember when I was a kid, even from time when I was a little younger than that, younger, I think even when we came out here, what I was really fascinated about doing, what I really wanted to do, was drive one of those big things, big earth scraper things involved. Not the one with the blade, but the one with the big sort of tank apparatus in the back where they pull it along and it would just scrape the dirt right up into the tank.
Oh, okay.
That was what I was fascinated about doing. So I was always kind of into, construction, engineering, that kind of stuff. Not so much designing it, but I wanted to be a working man.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your life. So where did you go to high school?
Okay. wound up, when we came back here, I say we were there for 2 years. I remember we moved out to Evanston. We arrived there in the middle of the winter. We went to Salvation Army, got a used stove for, 10 or 15 bucks or something, and rented this old house in the university. And then we were there for 2 years. And then we moved back out here. Dad went back to work for Braun again. And wound up, in the end, I think he had something like 100 people under him there. So he was pretty much kind of in probably more in management than doing design work himself by that point. But when we came back out, we lived at 1021 South Cordova Street. And that was just 5 houses south of Martha Baldwin School. So we were extremely close then. And the schools still in Alhambra today are K or K8 on the configuration. They don't have separate middle schools, so it's elementary is K8, and then there's high school. Now the students from Martha Baldwin School, but because of the way that their area is lined for where you went to high school, our class got totally scattered. A third went to Alhambra High School, a third went to Keppel, a third went to San Gabriel High School, which was still fairly new at that point. Mm-hmm. It was the newest of the 3. And I remember when we go there.
So you went to San Gabriel?
San Gabriel High School, yeah. I think it's technically in the city of Alhambra, but it's on the other side of the Alhambra Wash there. And at that time, across from the San Gabriel High School was the city dump. And we got to watch them as they gradually filled the city dump in. And I remember, I know it was there when I was in high school. They set up the first 9-hole Alhambra Golf Course there. And later, when I understand when they put the railroad that runs across Alhambra underground, when they had a lot of dirt left over, so they piled a bunch more dirt in, and then they went to 18 holes on the golf course. So, but still, Alhambra still has more acreage tied up in that golf course operation and the driving range associated with it than it does in all parks in the city combined. So it's a pretty major thing. I know in 1917 it was the subject of a county grand jury looked at it. It was looking at all the ones around. But at that point, the county grand jury wasn't looking at places for housing, but they were looking for where can we get more park space. And they said, why don't we take cut this back maybe to 9 holes again and have more park space. And it was one of the things, well, that didn't fly with the folks at the city, but and a lot of golf courses have been transitioned either into housing or to other things, but not Alhambra's. But we used to, and there were other things that came in. They might have been when I was still in grade school rather than high school there at Martha Baldwin. They had the heliport there, and they would fly the mail in from downtown LA by helicopter.
Oh, wow.
And we'd go out there and we'd watch the helicopter land and everything.
Why would they fly it from
I don't know. They probably had lots of spare helicopters after the war or something. And I figured this was going to speed up things. But, it's not that far, from downtown LA or anything. But there were, it wasn't just Alhambra, it was a lot of others around. Of course, Alhambra, when I was a kid, and when we moved to South Sierra Vista and later all the way through grade school, they still had the old airport in Alhambra. It wasn't in use anymore, been shut down for a number of years, but some of the buildings were still there, had a lot of windows knocked out of them and everything. But they were still there. And then now it's called the airport tract because it's been converted mostly into housing. It ran from New on the one side to Almanza on the other. It was south of Valley all the way down to pretty much what was the 10 freeway, I guess. But they're fascinating old articles I've run across just Googling it. And so there was one where a plane overshot the runway and ran into some house in the middle of the night on Almanza, and the guy had to run out in his nightshirt, you know, and all. But it was a major international airport in those days. When we were here, like I say, it was shut down already. But there were other features that I recall as a kid, very near Martha Baldwin School and where the YMCA is now, where the YMCA is now in Corto, just south of Mission and just little bitty chapel there. In those days, I remember right after World War II, and I went down to the Alhambra Historical Society to just check out my recollection because I remember that being housing. And I remember, I'm not 100% certain, but I think my father's sister and her husband lived there for a short while after World War II. He'd been in the Army Air Corps. And when I went down and checked it out, yes, it had been. It was, you know, it shows in those old city directories as Alhambra Veterans Housing. I don't remember how many it is, 50 units or so. Obviously built after World War II. The recollection that I had, I don't know who was in charge of it or anything, who had funded the operation, but there was a lot of effort to build housing for veterans after World War II. Obviously didn't last that long because the YMCA is there now, and that had been there for probably 30 some years that the Y has been at that location. And I think it was torn down probably before that. I don't believe it was torn down by the Y. I think it was vacant land when the Y got it. And at first that land had not been, it was not deeded to the YMCA. The city owned the land. And so the city may well have owned the veterans' housing too. I have to go back and research all that. But they weren't fancy houses. They were just sort of like a strip of housing units like you might find for the military or something. They were built maybe 6, 8 units in a line there, all connected and so forth. And I don't remember being yards or anything, but they may have had some. But anyway, when you went there, I do remember people there. I remember, this gets back into the stamp thing. There was one of the guys, Walt Dabercow, one of my buddies in school down there. And he had a single mom. He lived with a single mom. And I remember he had one of these old stamps from 1901. It had a picture known as the Pan American Series from the Pan American Exposition back in Buffalo, New York. And the 4-cent one had early automobile on it, everything. And 5-cent stamp showed some bridge, and 2-cent one showed a train, and 1-cent had some navigation steamer on the Great Lakes or something.
So you remember each image?
Yeah. But I remember he had one of those little 4-cent stamps, and it was damaged, but it was really interesting to see it, you know. And at that age, well, you know, it was 50 years old or something then, the stamp, but it was not the kind of thing you saw every day. But if somebody, you could buy them at the stamp shop or something.
So were you guys friends in high school?
Yeah, I can't remember. He might have wound up going to Alhambra High School because, like I say, we all got split up.
Okay.
And depended where exactly what area. He lived closer to Alhambra High School.
Okay.
So yeah.
So after high school, then where did you go? What did you do?
After high school, well, I was in high school there, and I remember Dad when we were first in grade school, and then even into high school up till 11th grade, we had an allowance, and all the other kids pretty much had allowances.
How much was your allowance?
Ours was 25 cents a week.
Wow. And what did you do for your
Well,
allowance?
you couldn't do. I remember we complained about it because all the other kids were getting like $1 or something.
Okay.
And so I remember Dad made up this list, and man, I wish I had a copy of that. And he said, all right, we'll pay you by the task. You'll start at 0. And there were gravy train things. You watered the yard, that was a penny. And you scrubbed the bathroom, the sink and the bathtub and the toilet and everything, that was 3 cents. And then you mowed both lawns, the front lawn and the back lawn, with an old hand lawnmower. When you pushed, the lawnmower was older than we are, and it didn't have a grass catcher on the back, so you had to rake the grass off after you mowed it too. That was a nickel. And he had it work, making your bed, that was gravy, that was a penny. But he had worked out, so you still got $0.25 a week, you know. And so what would you do? Well, we were given the money for lunch, but if you skipped going to the regular thing and just bought maybe a candy bar or something at the student store, you could pocket maybe a dime or something.
Okay.
You know.
So you were given lunch money separate from your allowance?
Yeah, separate from the allowance. Yeah, we didn't have to pay. You would have starved on $0.25 a week because everything was a lot cheaper then. Candy bars were generally a nickel in those days. I'm astounded by what they are in the store now, where they're $1.50 to $2.
Right.
And you go down to Home Depot or something there, where I was the last couple of days getting some stuff to fix where the tankless water heater had gone out on us. So it was basically a wiring problem, so I had to jerry rig something to get the hot water back. And but down there and the checkout, I think they were all $3 to $4. And of course, they're big jumbo size, bigger than the sizes we had. But I went back in, and I was also in the Boy Scouts out here.
Okay.
And both in grade school and in high school, pretty much, I can't remember, but I know it's in the Post Advocate somewhere. There's a picture of myself and Art Rudd getting our Eagle Scout awards.
Okay. Did you like your time in the Boy Scouts? Or?
Oh, yeah. I was in it both here and back in Illinois. I remember Illinois, we went out to one camping trip by some area that used to have some sort of Indian history and everything there. And here you get to go to the Boy Scout trips out by Barstow, Camp Cherry Valley in the summer. You go over to Catalina there and so forth. It was a lot of fun earning the merit badges and this kind of thing. It's much more elaborate now. Eagle Scouts had to develop a special project now, which you didn't have to do in those days. You just had to get the merit badges and stuff in those days.
What did you do to get the merit badges?
Well, one of them was stamp collecting, of course. Okay. And then there's civics in the community, something about that, swimming.
In the civics in the community, do you remember particular activities that you guys did?
I don't really recall right now. You had to, they have a little booklet for each merit badge, what you got to know and so forth. And I'm sure they still have them. Okay. I have my wife's sister's daughter's husband actually works for the Boy Scouts now back in Texas at their national headquarters. And it's changed a lot recently. Now girls can be in Boy Scouts. It's called Scouting USA now instead of Boy Scouts. And Pete Hegseth doesn't like that, and he wants to sever the Army's relationship, where the Army had a close relationship supplying some of the medical stuff at the jamborees and things like that. He says, you know, he wants them to kick the girls out and be all manly again or something.
Yeah. So let me ask. So you're in high school. So did you go to college after that?
Yes. Let me go back a little bit on high school there. I remember, a lot of my high school teachers, Mr. Tracy in chemistry, and Ms. Monroe, and Mr. Coach Purcell, and people like that who taught physics and stuff there. But high school, I liked high school. One time I was you did this cross-country run once a week. And it was about 5/8, 3/4 of a mile, something like that. And it was right across. You could see how much the city dump was being filled in, because that was right across the way from where you were. And one time I'd split my lip open. It was supposed to be touch football, but wound up making a little contact there. And so I had to be in the nurse's office and get sewn up. And the nurse or doctor, whoever it was, I'm sure it wasn't an MD, some kind of nursing person, had another guy in there who was in for an earache. And he came out and he asked for a pair of tweezers. And he went back in and he came out and the doctor was just grinning from ear to ear. This kid had been in a pea shooter fight and got a pea lodged in his ear, and it had started to sprout. So here was a sprouted pea he had pulled out of this guy's ear. But Mr. Kruger was the principal then. Mr. Freeborn was my counselor. And I actually, from high school, as I recall, San Gabriel High School still hadn't gone through accreditation yet by the time I graduated. It was still very new. And so it was, I didn't have any problem getting into college or anything, but I'm sure a lot of the colleges were wondering, oh, what's this place? It's not WASC accredited or anything. And but I actually got admitted to Caltech. I didn't have the money to go there. Our school, San Gabriel High School at that time, did not teach calculus. The highest you could go was trigonometry. But I was pretty good in math. The SATs, the highest score you could get then was 800 in math. I got 780. I still don't know what one I missed.
What was your English score?
Maybe their answer was wrong. But I was pretty good at math. And I also got admitted to Stanford, and I had applied to UC Riverside. But I applied to Harvard, didn't get in there, but I wouldn't have fit in there at all. I also applied to Rice University in Texas. I was kind of interested because they had a 5-year program where you got both a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Science degree. And you would go 5 years and you would major in both areas and all. And I was going to go there because it had no tuition. It had all these oil wells behind it. So it was much less expensive than Caltech or anything. And I got a few scholarships. I got 400 from the Elks and so forth. I remember I had to go down to get your award. And there are all these guys dressed up with all these elk things on their head going, ugga, ugga, and everything. It was sort of funny on that. But I went to, I was going to go to Rice. And my parents made a big deal. I was going to pick the college I was going to go to. But then mom and dad were talking, and I'm sure it was mom mostly, but really they felt I should stay closer to home. So without telling me, they'd sent a telegram to Rice canceling out my registration. I was pretty mad. I talked to them for a couple of days afterwards, but yeah, UC Riverside was just fine. And looking later at the curriculum at Rice, it was the history department there, big on the antebellum South and all that kind of stuff. And my interests are much broader than that. So
why do you say you would not have fit in at Harvard?
I remember the guy came out. They actually interviewed you. Remember, came out, sat down in the living room with you, and I just. I'm a pretty middle-class kid, and no prep schools or any of that kind of stuff. I just think I would not have fit in well there.
So you go to UC Riverside.
Yeah, I go to UC Riverside. And I remember they gave us a math test coming in. And I placed into the honors section of calculus. When I got in there, I found I was the only kid in the class who hadn't had calculus in high school. So, man, did I have to run to keep up. But it was a very rigorous kind of thing. You had to not just learn the theorems, you had to prove them all, and everything. So it was a pretty rigorous thing. And I went in as a physics major. And they didn't have engineering, they do now. I probably would have gone into civil engineering or something, just like my dad had. But I went in as a physics major there. But even from the start, you're supposed to take chemistry your first year. I waited until the second year to take chemistry. And I took humanities instead. And by the time I had taken so many history courses and other things. By the time I was a senior, I had accumulated so many credits and everything in there. And man, they worked your ass off at Riverside. I petitioned to go add a second major in history. And so I'm probably the only guy who's ever graduated from UC Riverside with a double degree in physics and history.
Wow.
And for the history bachelor's degree, not a master's, not a doctorate, you had to have a thesis. Mine was 138 pages on German economic penetration of the Balkan and Danubian nations in the 1930s. And a lot of it researched in German. I had to go in there and I have footnotes on the great Slivovitz crisis of 1939, where Germany invaded Poland, and the whole economic system during the Depression had totally broken down in Europe. The financial system was just a total mess. So what had gotten to be the case was the countries negotiate what were known as clearing agreements, so that money wouldn't cross international boundaries. If somebody in Greece was buying an automobile or something or machinery or something from Germany, they didn't send the money to Germany. They paid it into the Greek central bank. And then if somebody in Greece was selling olive oil or something to Germany, they didn't get paid to Germany. The payment came from the Greek central bank. But the money didn't cross international boundaries. And the same in Germany, it went in and out of the central banks. Well, the problem was Germany was getting so much stuff from these other countries that it was really a problem. So the other countries, in order to just get something to show for what they were doing, would take anything. At one point, Greece took 100,000 harmonicas from Germany just to get something.
Sort of like a barter.
Yeah.
And was this the hyperinflation?
Yugoslavia took a 10-year supply of aspirin from Germany.
Wow.
And then the great Slivovitz crisis was when Germany had contracted for most of the plum crop from Yugoslavia. But then they canceled the order when they invaded Poland. And so here are all these orchards full of ripe plums. What the hell do you do with them? You know, there's no other real market for them right away. So they turned a lot of it into Slivovitz, which is plum brandy. And then it outran the supply of bottles, kegs, and casks in the country. And so they had to drink up the excess. And in the massive collective hangover that followed, they used up 2 years' worth supplies of their 10-year supply of aspirin. So all this kind of stuff, it's all in my thesis.
Okay. Okay.
All well documented.
So obviously the world of education and ideas is important to you.
Yeah, yeah.
And so how does that carry forward after college, and how so?
Yeah, yeah. When I was at UC Riverside there, it was very interesting. It was a small school. It was 1,500 students. It was probably as small as my high school. Now it's 30-some thousand. But it was had only been open a couple of years at that point. They didn't have, when I first went there, all the sessions in like the humanities course. They were taught, each discussion session was by a professor. It wasn't by a teaching assistant or something. And it had a very good reputation. Later, of course, all that changed and became like all the other schools. But it was situated out in, there were still a lot of orange groves around it. And it was built on the site, really, the old citrus experiment station there. And that's still up on the hill there and everything. And
what was that?
I don't know how far back the citrus experiment station went, but probably back to around 1910 or something. I'm just guessing. Could be a couple decades.
What was the citrus experiment station?
Oh, they it was connected with the citrus industry and running experiments on crossbreeding types of oranges and things like that. Probably a lot of plant disease stuff. I remember my grandfather on my mother's side, he even somewhere is supposed to have a McClintock strawberry that he patented and so forth. And he did a lot. My mother was actually born in Georgia. And they were kind enough to put on her birth certificate the name of the nearest town, Griffin, Georgia. She was actually born in a place called Experiment Farm, Georgia, and that probably doesn't look too good on a birth certificate. But it was an experiment station, and Grandpa was down there. He developed all kinds of things that saved millions of dollars a year in the peach crop,
right,
and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you do after graduating?
After graduating, I went to graduate school, but I went on in history rather than in physics. And I remember I got a fellowship. Somebody else, they were originally going to give it to somebody else, but he decided to do something else. So they called me up and said, "Well, are you coming back? And are you coming back in history or in physics?" I'm coming back in history.
Why did you choose history? Why did you choose history?
I was more interested in it. The physics department there sort of specialized at that time in low temperature solid state physics. And Yeah, I just figure there's more going on in the world than low temperature solid state physics.
You know? Is that like for rocketry, or what would that have been?
Well, it can use it for all kinds of things. I had over the years done. I remember one summer, my dad was working for Wofford National Engineering Science Company then, and another guy there needed some people to help him on. They had a couple other projects. One was. One summer, I got on there. One of the other people who worked there was doing a project designing how to predict wave conditions at port facilities given storm conditions and weather conditions on the oceans and sea far out over time and everything. And so it was contouring a lot of ocean wind patterns and stuff. And then another summer, I had one there where I was working for a guy. It was a contract on project QX and DX. One of those was for detection of incoming warheads and how to defend against incoming missiles. And project QX was how to overcome the defensive measures and get through.
Okay.
But I had to have security clearance for that and everything, secret level security clearance. Everything had to be locked up at night in cabinets. You couldn't take anything home or anything.
So you decided to go into history, though.
Yeah. Well, I found that kind of interesting, but we studied all the ANFPS 49 and 50 radars, so I know. We were in Greenland a long time. That was one of the three major facilities. Flyingdale, England, Toole, Greenland, and Clear, Alaska were the three major BMUs, ballistic missile early warning stations. And they were kind of, they had the thing pretty well worked out. But when it first began, there were some problems. Because they had the array radars, which basically detect stuff. And once they detect something, they have more tracking radars that lock in, little dish radars lock in, get more tracking info. And then they put that on a screen as little circles would come out from where it had been launched from and where it looked like it was going to impact. Well, first night they had the system up, there was a big problem because they got all these warning alerts, but the circles weren't coming there. They finally figured out they were detecting the moon, So they had a few bugs to work out of the system. But yeah, I enjoyed doing that. I remember the summer after I graduated from Riverside with my bachelor's degree, that summer I was working for a different outfit called Quantum Engineering up in Pasadena. Small outfit, had one guy from the University of Illinois, Roy Cohn, and then there were a couple of us as secretary and two of us doing work in the back there on designing the material. One thing was electrostatic field meters for spacecraft skins. The other was this big apparatus for detecting buried weapons caches and so forth, and for the Vietnam operation that was going on. And most of the little mine detector units that they have now, or even at that time, were pretty good. I mean, if you're searching for metal coins on the beach or something, those are pretty good. And they have usually a transmitting coil for receiving coils overlapping. But the thing drops off as there's a tremendous drop off as you go down deeper. And so the thing to detect buried weapons caches was 100 1-meter coils of copper. And it was ranged in a triangle, 200-meter coils, and one other. It took two guys to carry it. And if you're trying to find something like mines or something like that, Yeah, you can find it with this, but it's easier just to drop the thing and it'd set them all
It
off.
says that.
You know?
Yeah.
But
Well, and you'd be walking right over the area that you're
and
trying
also you picked up in the headsets every radio station in the globe on the thing. And the electrostatic field meters were very fine, but they were given the forces that rockets are undergoing. I don't know that they ever use them or anything. It just, I don't know that they can stand the stress. They functioned, but it was contra-vibrating wires and electrostatic fields and all this stuff. And we designed them, and I remember I got 2 shocks the whole summer, both on the same day. Once was like 20,000 volts, but it was at extremely high frequency, so it wasn't that bad. And one is the 110 out of the wall, and man, that'll send you. Yeah, because the frequency is so much less, you know.
Okay.
But at any rate, I went on. So I got this phone call, are you coming back? And yeah, they had this John Randolph and Dora Haynes Fellowship, 1,500, just pick up a check for 150 once a month. And that was great.
Did that pay your living expenses?
It paid, yeah. By that time, I was living in the dorms when I was an undergraduate. Stonehenge, we still get together once in a while, some of the guys from that. We haven't since COVID, but up to then, we were still getting together pretty regularly. And just seeing how everybody was doing and everything. And but then in my graduate year there, rented a house overlooking 3820 Ridge Road in Riverside. It's kind of overlooking Fairmont Park, a little bit above Fairmont Park there, with the old steam locomotive on it, and a bunch of guys from school. I wasn't involved in it myself, but they had gone down, and the school wanted a victory bell. I don't know why. The football team never won anything, but they sawed the brass bell off that steam locomotive. It's still gone. Okay. I was by there a year or so ago. It's still gone.
Yeah.
And I gave it to the university, and I think the university found out where it came from and gave it back. But the house rented for $90. There were 3 of us living in it. It was 2 stories. And it was furnished. $90 a month rent, split 3 ways, so we weren't even paying $1 a night.
Wow.
And but you know, prices were different.
Yeah.
And that was actually not considered that low rent in the area at the time. There were a lot of old houses there. And of course, there was a lot of new construction going on, so people wanted the new houses. So the old houses, hadn't bothered to fix them up much.
Yeah.
There were 4 guys had this house, 2 stories, spiral staircase in the middle of an orange grove. They were splitting $30 a month rent 4 ways, $7.50 each a month. Wow. It was unfurnished. You know.
Yeah.
You know, there were things like that, and some people didn't even want to do that. One guy just got some old postal truck and lived in that.
So what did you study in grad school?
Okay, in grad school, they had at Riverside, not only the history of art, I don't know if it's still like this, but you had to have a thesis for a bachelor's. For a master's, you had to pass 12 hours of examinations, 3 hours in a foreign language, 3 hours in American history, 3 hours in European history, and 3 hours in another field of your choice. And these were very, very rigorous exams. And they wouldn't take the educational testing service, the College Board type foreign language test. You had to pass their foreign language test. I remember the one in German it had a part where they gave you 50 pages in advance to read, and then they would pick 1 page out of that at random. You had to translate that out with the dictionary. The other one, I think you could use a dictionary on was some passage you'd never seen before, and in our case, it was some guy philosophizing about the consequences for philosophy of history in Germany due to Germany's loss of World War I. And even when you have it translated perfectly, you really weren't quite sure what it was saying
a
or
lot
something.
Of abstract.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you ever read any of Kafka's stuff in German, he has sentences that run for pages.
Oh wow.
You know, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like Conrad, the old English novelist, is like that too. He has some really long ass sentences. Yeah.
So let's move on from your education. So what did you do after you graduated from grad school?
Yeah. When I first graduated, I remember one of the things was when I was still, I can't remember whether it was a grad or an undergrad then. Was I graduated, my bachelor's was 65, and I got my master's in probably January, February, or March of 67. And as I recall, somewhere in there, I remember was the Vietnam thing was heating up, and the civil rights thing was heating up even before that. And I remember attending some meetings on campus about the civil rights stuff that was going on in the South, and being very supportive of that. And at one point, there was a little club there formed called Declare. And I wasn't that active with it, but they asked me one time to meet with the chancellor over having the university, if people were going to use their facilities to advertise their rentals, that they would have to sign a non-discrimination pledge. And I remember meeting with the chancellor about that, old Herman T. Spieth, and he was very resistant to that. And so it didn't happen then, but then later the state law changed, outlawing discrimination and so forth. But it was still a very active thing. When we were looking for that house on Ridge Road, I was there. I was going around checking some of the ads and everything. I remember going to one place and the lady said, okay, but none of your roommates are black, are they? Mm-hmm. You know, so you got it. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things were still going on. And then later, when things were heating up at Berkeley and everything there with the free speech movement and all that kind of stuff going on, Riverside wanted to do something, but none of the faculty members knew anything about Vietnam or anything. Well, I read a book on the French history of the French colonial regime in Vietnam, so I knew a lot. So they had me be one of the speakers. I was the only one who wasn't a professor who spoke. And I remember one girl asking me after the question and answer, well, should we stay there or should we just get out? And it was something I'd really thought that deeply about before. And I thought about it and I said, well, I think unless we're willing to do something different, probably get out. And then later, I was in 67, I was up in Berkeley that summer. And I was auditing a couple classes without paying the auditor's fee. You just went in and listened to the lectures and stuff. And the library is fabulous at Berkeley. They got all these original pamphlets from the French Revolution in there. Paper's kind of brittle and everything. But gosh, they just got fabulous stuff there. And I got more involved with the anti-Vietnam War movement at that time. I remember seeing pictures of mother and child having been burned to a crisp by napalm and stuff like that. You know, you can't really justify that kind of stuff. You look at today, even Gaza and everything else, the number of casualties, the number of people killed in Gaza, 70, 75,000 now. Well, there are 50-some thousand Americans who were killed in Vietnam. Way over 1 million people on the other side. I mean, it was just devastating what was going on there. I don't think it's ever really looked at in, it wasn't as much as World War II, but that was still pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I remember, my reaction about learning about My Lai and so forth and what had happened there with the slaughter of all the people there. Mm-hmm. So I got involved. I was living at I-House, the International House. I had a Korean roommate. But most of the time I was out at either cribbing classes off the university or out at the Port Chicago Vigil, where a group of people had set up a little truck with the big word fire bombs on it. They'd follow the munitions trucks from where the napalm bombs were manufactured in Redwood City up to Port Chicago, where they were loaded on boats and shipped over to the Far East. And Port Chicago, a big naval base during World War II, and before things were desegregated in the services, it was all African Americans loading the munitions. There was some horrible explosion late in World War II there, killed 300 and some people. Wow. And the anchor from one of the ships was found a couple miles away in a hillside and so forth. Wow. It just leveled the town and everything. But up there, and that was an experience. We were offside the base. They'd haul the truckloads of napalm in there. And some people, not me, but some other people go out and stand in front of the trucks, and they'd have to wait for the sheriff because they were off the base. So they'd have to wait for the sheriff's department to come out and arrest them. And then later they decided, well, the government, the Marines on the base had the right to protect any government property in view. So they would go out, beat them up, throw them in a water-filled ditch, and wave the trucks on. It wouldn't arrest them, but and then when CBS and everything learned about this, Cronkite and those people sent a camera crew out to film what was going on there, and and he ran something on it that night. And then all the other networks were out there the next day, shooting thousands of dollars worth of high-speed color film and everything.
What was your role in this protest?
I was just one of the people there, but there were things that would happen. They rented a little house in the town of Clyde where the demonstrators could sleep at night. And then there was an outfit called the Clyde Vigilante formed to, protect against us. And there were shots fired. I don't ever really remember anything fired at me or anything, but that did happen. There was another time when a truckload of apparently Korean War veterans came out, and they threatened us, if you're not all gone when we get back, we're going to paint you all yellow. So they came back later, 5-gallon can of yellow paint. And I remember the guy just went around like that. And I didn't really catch it, but some of the other people just covered head to foot with it. And, they beat a bunch of us up and stuff like that. I got socked in the jaw and things. Jaw hurt for a while. And then some of these things, there'd be a reporter from AP there, and he'd run a very negative story about us or something. But these were some of the aspects. I remember there was one time down by the port facility itself, there was some demonstration going on there, and I went down, and one police officer directed me to park over there, and then another police officer later gave me a ticket for parking over there. Well, he didn't care. The other officer told me to park there, this kind of stuff. You got, and there was one guy sat down on the railroad tracks, and the railroad train hit him. He lost his legs and stuff like that. So, but it had some impact, but there were a lot of different things going on. And so, at any rate, I came back. After I got my master's from there, I went on to UCLA. I was technically in a doctoral program, but I was really probably as much involved. I did a lot of study, both even at Riverside as an undergraduate. I took a unit of independent study on the Middle East. I had to read 5 books on the Middle East, write 5 5-page papers and so forth. A lot of work for one unit, on a 15-unit load or something. And there were just things like that where I would sort of follow my interests. And so I had a background on Mossadegh and Iraq and Iran and all that kind of stuff, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company and all that kind of stuff. I had a lot of background on
So at UCLA, was that what you were studying, the Middle East?
Well, no, at UCLA, I was... I took a lot of courses. I took some independent study courses where I would just read history of the American novel and stuff like that.
Were you teaching, like adjunct professor?
I actually was a research assistant in history of science, reading all these papers for the professor who actually... His wife knew my dad from Tulsa when he was a kid.
Oh, wow. And you're combining the two things you like, so science and history.
And I did. I also was a teaching assistant for a couple of years there in the 7 ABC history courses. And I was the only TA who gave lectures once in a while there. Not a lot, 2 or 3. But I was the only TA who did any lecturing on things. I did one on the progressive movement in Los Angeles. Catherine Phillips Edson. I did a very extensive research paper on her. She was the lobbyist for the women's groups on getting votes for women, getting the state legislature to put on the ballot to allow the men to vote if women could vote too. And all,
and the women to vote if men could vote.
Yeah. And so she was also the first head of the Industrial Welfare Commission in the state of California. She later got involved in anti-Japanese things, land ownership later. But her father had been from Ohio, and he'd been in the legislature there, and he developed some of the early stuff about pasteurizing milk and requiring this to be done to stop tuberculosis and so forth. So she has some kind of background with that before she came out here. She married an actor out here, and they had some little People's Theater or something downtown. They lived off later in a place up north that was a little almonddale, they called it. Had some almond trees, and they set up a little sort of utopian community up there or something. Didn't last very long. I remember going out and driving out to see where it was. A few trees left, but no houses or anything there anymore.
So when did you come back to Alhambra?
came back to Alhambra. Well, my folks had always stayed pretty much in the Alhambra area. When I went away to college, we were still living on South Cordova Street, right by Martha Baldwin School. Later, they bought a house from a San Gabriel High School teacher on Roses Road, which is maybe 2 blocks outside the city limit of Alhambra, but still very close to Alhambra. Dad still worked in Alhambra and everything. And he was actually a member of the Alhambra Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
Not because he had a business, because in those days you could be an individual member. You know, I don't know that they have that anymore.
Did he ever talk about that? Did you see him do anything with that?
Well, he was always supportive of Alhambra businesses.
Mm-hmm. Were there a lot of people that joined that? Do you know?
I don't know. I knew he wasn't the only one, but they now I think they pretty much have categories or something, but I don't think there's anything for just an individual to just join and be a member of the Chamber of Commerce. But he was, and he was active and supportive and all. I don't know that he went to meetings or anything. Later in his older days, he was a Republican when we were kids back in the Eisenhower-Nixon days. But his on my mother's side, that family came up. They had been very affected by the Depression. And she talked about going, her father took her and her 2 brothers outside the bank after it failed in the Depression and shook his fist at the bank and said, "You guys see that money? That bank had stole your college money."
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
And he kept his money after that in U.S. postal savings. The post office used to have a bank. You could go down to the post office and deposit money in the bank. Paid 2% interest. Not a lot, but it was safe. You know, and then of course later Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, all these things came in. But there was no guarantee prior to the Depression about that stuff. And so my mom had always had sort of a little bit of a liberal streak there. Like I say, her father, after they moved to Michigan and all, they lived in a utopian socialist community, but I don't remember any teachings about that or anything as a kid.
Okay.
Yeah. And my dad's father had been in the oil industry, Marathon Oil, Ohio Oil Company back in the Midwest. And he was basically in charge, his job was mostly sales, selling tank carloads of oil and stuff. And was pretty Republican. And my dad's mother came from a family of a banker. And so when his father married her, that sort of linked him up with, you know, better jobs and stuff in the oil company and so forth. So they were pretty much rock rib Republican. But my dad's younger brother was also in World War II. But after the war, he came back and went to medical school. They wound up, he was a medic in World War II. And after school, after the war, he went and became a doctor, became an MD. And but he was a supporter of Henry Wallace's campaign in 1948, the Progressive Party movement, which broke away from the Democratic Party. And Henry Wallace actually had been the vice president in Roosevelt's 3rd term. And a lot of the business community was very uncomfortable with that, got Truman in as the vice president in the last term. But Wallace then ran for president on his own and didn't carry any states or anything, got reasonable number of votes, but was very progressive on issues like race, insisted that his rallies not be segregated, things like that. Yeah.
So what did you become a teacher at some point? Or?
Yeah, not right away. Okay. Like I say, I led discussion sessions, gave some lectures at UCLA in the 7 ABC U.S. History course. Then I was working there while I was at UCLA. So I had some income from the research assistant, teaching assistant jobs. Lived in Venice, again, $88 a month rent on an apartment split 3 ways. 80, 90 cents a night, and not what you consider the finest neighborhood. There were like 7 people murdered within a block and a half of where I lived the first year I lived there. Wow. It was a tough part of town. In Venice, inland part, Oakwood section. Okay. Yeah, not the beach road.
All right.
And 644 Indiana, number 3 upstairs there. I was first white person to move into the apartment building, and most of the others were African American. There was one Chicano guy lived in one of the units. So let's see, where were we?
Yeah. What do you do after grad school then?
Oh, after grad school, yeah. Well, actually, when I was at UCLA, I was very involved in the anti-war movement. I remember at one point they were going to have an anti-war moratorium. A bunch of speakers there, and they were going to have Cranston speak, who was a U.S. senator and stuff like that. And well, Cranston had been involved in purging Cy Cassidy from his position as head of the California Democratic Council over his anti-war views. And I said, really, we got to have some people in here. And they had no student speaker, so they finally changed it, and they put me on to speak as one of the speakers. And 5,000, 10,000 people there or something. And I remember I was in the waiting room to speak, and I think Burt Lancaster was in there, a couple other people. And I helped design, when they had one of the student strikes, I designed where all the picket lines would be and everything.
Okay. So you're really involved in
yeah. And then things came up. In 67, I'd been up north. I was back down here. Then they had, I can't remember if it was before or after. I remember they had one where Muhammad Ali was out here. And he came to a rally at Century City, an anti-war demonstration. I'd have to check on the exact year. It might have been 66 or something. And he was signing people's draft cards and so forth. As the demonstration went along, I was a monitor, but I was on kind of the back end of the thing. And up at the front end, the march had stopped in front of the Century City Hotel, where President Johnson had a $500 plate fundraising dinner going on inside. And the police wound up just furious the thing had stopped, and began beating a lot of people up and so forth, and including a lot of professors from UCLA and stuff. And so it was a big deal. The next day, the LA Times ran the straight story, and of just the police side. And then a week later, they got so much feedback from people who'd been there that they had to run a big thing, really saying what would have been going on. And I remember that was the second time I had a letter to the editor published in the LA Times saying that normally the operation of the police is to arrest you, but then the punishment is determined by the judiciary. You don't just beat people up there.
Right.
And my first one had been when I was a freshman at UC Riverside, when it was published in there about the situation at that point, India had just taken over the Portuguese colony of Goa. And said, well, this is what people there wanted. And I said, well, then how about Kashmir, which is an area that's overwhelmingly Muslim. Everybody wanted to go, well, most everybody wanted to go with Pakistan, except the guy who was the prince wanted to go with India. So, and I said, well, do these same things apply there about looking what the wishes of the people are?
Yeah. Do you write to newspapers still?
Very rarely now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me jump to this topic since it's a big theme. You are known to be very involved, always present at city council meetings. Why is that? What makes you keep showing up?
Well, at first, when I moved back into Alhambra, my parents, in the 70s, about 1973, I helped move them back in from this house on Roses Road and just inside San Gabriel back down to where we are now, 105 North Cordova Street. It was an old house built in 1920, and they were renting it for the first approximately 20 years they were there, because all the kids had left, gone on to college and everything, and they wanted to downsize a little bit on the house. They didn't have any kids in there anymore. So they sold the old place for, I remember, $32,000 or something. It was on the market later for well over $1 million, of course. Mother was sure that housing prices were going to crash like they had in the Depression. So,
okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Daughter of the Depression.
Yeah.
And so they were down there. They rented for a long time. And I remember Dad kept a chart every year about how much the rent would go up every year. It was always fairly reasonable, but it was an old place. Then Mom passed away. She got Alzheimer's and passed away in 1998. Dad passed away in 2007. And at that point, Dad had he'd gotten some money from his parents when he died. And plus he'd been working all his life. And so when the lady who owned the house, my mom was still alive at that time, the lady who owned the house passed away. And so it was going to be very hard for my parents to move. Mom had Alzheimer's and everything by that time. And so they made an offer to the heirs, and they accepted. And then right after that, house prices crashed with the end of the Cold War and everything.
In the mid-90s.
Yeah. And but I remember helping them move in there and getting them set up, and so they were there. And let's see, we were leading up to that, and I can't remember exactly.
Well, I asked you your involvement in like city council.
Oh yeah.
Council.
Like I say, I wasn't living here right then. I was living at that time in La Puente. My wife, I still had my old house at the bottom of Mount Washington. The woman and I lived together there for about 8-9 years, and then she passed away of cancer. And we bought the house together. It was the old retired fire chief who owned there were 4 houses on a lot of land and a vacant lot next door that he owned. And he'd gotten all his tax depreciation out of them, and he knew the 4 families who lived there liked them. And he said, look, I got this guy who's going to buy this stuff from me. He's going to tear them down, put up some apartment buildings. If you guys want to give me the same amount of money that this guy's giving me to use as a tear down, they're yours. You pick over the first mortgage, which was at 4%. He would carry the second at 6% on a 15-year loan, and but you have to come up with a down payment 20% down in 30 days, so I can close this out by the end of the year. That was 73. So we did. Our share for the house was $12,500. That was the price, not the down payment. The down payment was $2,500. So I still got that old place. And then my wife had bought this place in La Puente. Yeah, she worked very hard. She taught day school. She taught night school. When she was in college, she worked a full-time shift at the Lockheed aircraft factory and went to college during the day and everything. So she bought this little house for $84,000 in La Puente. And after we got married, I moved out there. And so we were there, but we were close enough, proximity to where Dad was. We were very close. And after Dad passed away, we negotiated with my brothers and everything, and traded some stuff to them. And so we got the old house just because we kind of outgrown it. We're just accumulating stuff. You fill a house up there. Yeah. And so we got this place here. And then we spent a year and a half fixing it up. Very extensive operation to fix it up. And then finally moved into it. And I don't remember being politically active or anything in Alhambra from when we first moved in around. We really moved in when my wife had to have carotid artery surgery on both sides. And that was 1910 or 2010. But things, I remember 2019, might have been 2018 that it first came up. There was going to be a project down where the housing units are going up now between Cordova and Granada, just north of Main Street, 49 units going in. And there was an old Cadillac dealership, and Bewley Allen Cadillac going out of business a few years before. It was still in business when we went there. And so it had been closed for a couple of years. And then originally a Nissan dealership had bought the place and was going to build a bigger Nissan dealership there. And then I guess they had trouble getting it through the city and everything, so they wound up not doing it, sold the land. And the new development, Pacific Plaza Premier, I remember hearing nothing about it. There was, in those days, there was no signs in the neighborhood or anything. All of a sudden, we got a letter from the city, well, there was going to be a hearing in like a week about this new 64-foot commercial condominium was going to go in there. Very extensive, very, very tall glass thing. Only 4 floors, but 4 floors on steroids with a 388 unit parking structure on it and everything. And everybody was kind of horrified, but the notice doesn't go out very far. It only goes out within 300 feet. So, well, we were in 300 feet, so we got it. And I remember going down, I hadn't talked to any neighbors or anything, but I remember going down to the planning commission there, planning department there to see, can I see the plans on this thing? Because it didn't really have a lot of details in the notice. And I remember asking, are they going to put in a street light on the corner there of Cordova and Main? Now it's the only one that doesn't have a street light. really difficult to get out during rush hour. And they said, oh no. And it probably would have gone through.
So did this really jumpstart your involvement in city council meetings?
Yeah.
Okay.
And even after that got turned down, I sort of wasn't attending every meeting or everything. And, kind of was keeping an eye on things, but I wasn't that actively present. And I can't remember, then some other things came up later that got me into more continuous involvement. But that particular project wound up getting turned down by the Planning Commission on a split vote. And the fact is, it would have gone through that first night, except one technological thing happened. The tape recorder broke down, and they couldn't continue the meeting if they couldn't record the meeting. And so they had to postpone it to the next meeting. Well, by the next meeting, the word had spread around about this project. And man, there were, it was an overflow crowd in the city council chamber, and the overflow was all downstairs with the big pipe downstairs. And man, people were out with their pitchforks. They did not want that project there. And in the end, it got turned down. And the developer did not appeal to the city council. I guess he'd done a lot of other projects in Alhambra, and I guess he just sort of threw up his hands at that point. But they were still looking at doing something there. So they got, one of the things the Planning Commission had asked, well, would all the people who oppose this project designate 2 people to meet with the city planning department and the developer here. And so one person from the developer staff and the daughter of the developer and 2 people in the planning department, Vanessa, and the guy was then the lead person in Maya's position, were there. And the crowd downstairs, well, Marisol was very outspoken, so Marisol was one, and then some of the other people had suggested me, and so they wound up picking me for the second on ours. So, but I remember at that meeting, it was almost all Marisol speaking, and I actually took a turn in there to, one of the things I do is I complimented them on fixing the fence around the project, which had fallen into disrepair and fallen into the sidewalk and created a hazard, and they'd fix that up. And I guess they were so appreciative that somebody would recognize that they're taking some care with parts of the project. And at any rate, it wound up not going through, but they decided to try again. And they hired the guy who's presently the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce. They hired him to kind of interface with the community. He's based in Burbank or someplace, basically. Now spends most of his time here, I guess. Had his own consulting firm, did lots of work with many government agencies and so forth. And when, so he called me up and said, well, first, they didn't want to meet with the whole committee. They just wanted to meet with me. And I guess it was because they found I was sort of a reasonable person to work with. And so they said, well, can we just meet on your front porch and talk about things? And we wound up sitting down in our front room for about 45 minutes. And I had pictures of a lot of their other projects and stuff. And I said, well, the main concern about this, what they had proposed, was not the businesses that were going to be going in. It was just the scale of the project. And if it could be done on less height and things like that, it might well have been workable and all. But and at that point, they were still, and I said there's a bunch of other projects, and I showed them one was even a mixed-use project that they were doing in another town. 2 stories, one of commercial on the bottom, residential on the top. And I said that one looks pretty nice and stuff. And then they had the one that's down by Sprouts, that big one, 78-foot high one. And I said, people do not want to see that. Yeah, and so forth. But they were doing this project up on Stoneman there with they had 4 different designs: a French design, a Spanish design, and various others. And I said, "That's you've got some good thought going into design here, and the types of um, architectural finish and so forth that you're doing. And I think people would like to see something kind of along that line rather than the glass building that they were going to propose down there." And afterwards, I got a call back that it'd be a while before they got back to me. And then I got a call back a couple of weeks, and they just decided not to proceed with anything. And to put the place up for sale. And it was about 2 years, I guess, before they sold it. They still made money on it, but and the outfit that's in there now is the one they sold it to. And at any rate, I got one of the things that had come up along the way was when Sasha first ran for city council. There was a time where when Sasha was first elected, she ran against an incumbent. That's a pretty hard thing to do in general. I was shocked that she won. I think a lot of people probably were. She had a fair amount of funding from some union sources and so forth. But first off, campaigning citywide is much more difficult. That last race, to succeed her, most of the candidates had walked every door in the district, some of them more than once. So it's really down to very retail, person-to-person politics now, with things being the elections to city council being by district, just for the voters in the district. Not in the old one, you just had to live in the district, but it was voted on everybody in the city, and that got to be prohibitive time, expense, and everything.
Yeah.
Well, Sasha had heard me speak a number of times at the city council. She wasn't on the city council at that time, but when she got in, I remember she emailed me and said, "Would you like to be on the Housing and Community Development Citizen Advisory Committee?" And at first I didn't see her thing, and she got in touch with me again. I said, yeah, it would be, yeah. And she'd been on it, I don't think for very long, but she'd heard me talk about affordable housing and things like that, and liked what I had to say. And so she put me on as one of her 2 appointees. Now it's down to just 1 appointee each as of a few months back. At first I was on just as a member, and then after a couple of years, the guy who was the vice chair hardly ever came, and so I got the vice chair position. And then she did not reappoint the guy who was the chair, but the guy she appointed turned out not to want to do it, and he did, so that seat was left open. And then we hadn't met for ages. We were supposed to have a new chair election last March, we finally got, I can't remember how long ago I got elected, maybe December or something. And there'd been no meetings in there because they couldn't get a quorum.
Do you think people are as civically engaged today as in previous decades?
In my area, fairly. I think.
Your area being housing issues?
Well, yeah, I'm talking my
development?
geographical area
Okay.
in kind of the northeast area around the 801 area,
Okay.
which that activated a lot of people.
Okay.
And
Sort of the East Main Street.
yeah, East Main Street is, you got a lot of community activity
Right.
in that area.
Trying to.
I don't know that you see that in every area.
Okay.
But you certainly do in that area. I think there are other local areas that have it. The city has changed so much from when I was a kid. I just don't remember a lot of apartment buildings or anything when I was a kid. It was mostly single family houses. And now there are RH zones and RM zones that are well, pretty much clustered more towards the central part of the city. But those, there are areas on South Sierra Vista, where I was, still R1. But the area to the north of that is now much more densely packed.
What are your feelings on density, housing density?
Well, as a kid, I liked the single family house. I liked having a yard, a place where you could build a playhouse in the back and this kind of stuff. But I realized as an adult, I have lived in different kinds of situations. There's many times where I didn't have permanent roots. An apartment is just fine, particularly if it's 88 cents a night.
You know? Yeah, the ultimate benefit of affordable housing.
Right, yeah. And I don't know how many young people make it now.
Yeah.
God, it is so expensive on things, housing and everything else. We make it, and we'll be in much better shape if I live 3 more years. We'll finally have the mortgage paid off on our place here because it was very expensive to get that house.
What are other issues, if any, besides housing and development that you're sort of civically engaged in or concerned about?
Yeah, well, one right at the moment, but it's still pretty much in the affordable housing range. There's a new project going in at 110 South Chapel. It's kind of a court arrangement as 8 individual units. And then there's a little sort of duplex in the back, and then it backs up on the wash.
An old bungalow court?
Yeah, it's kind of like a bungalow court, but they're all individual units.
These are the new things?
The old ones.
Oh, the old ones.
Yeah. And it drops down on the back by the San Pasquale Wash there that goes by the AMC Healthcare Center, which is not Alhambra Hospital Medical Center, it's Advanced Hospital Management Corporation. It doesn't own the Alhambra one, but it owns the Garfield one, and it owns one in Northern California and a bunch of others in Southern California. And what's going in, originally there was a project going to go in a couple of years ago. It might be the same guy, Carl Wong. Carl Wong is the same owner who owned that place and was going to put housing in there. There's a Carl Wong who owned the old music building that burned down on East Main Street there, who finally got an approved project, finally worked with the community and got everybody on board. It's going to be a 2-story, little bit over 35 feet, but not much. Some shops on the front, bottom, and then it was going to be like your I own a workspace.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think you went to the meeting.
I was at that meeting. With
Yeah.
Marisol.
Yeah.
And were you at that meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the community really came together.
Yeah,
That was a great example.
and worked with them, and he was willing to work with us, and I think a really good project. And I know he's had to extend it once. I don't know if it's going to lapse on him or if he's going back to get it extended again, but ground's never been broken on it. But it got to be something that people felt they could live with. It was like what they'd like to see in the area. Got some good design features in it and everything. And he was willing to work with us. And frankly, I think he would be much happier with what we've come up with him than the original plan he had, which was just kind of a big boxy kind of thing without that much in the way of features and all. And would have been a space that was harder to work with. I don't know. Have you been in touch with the guy? Or anything?
I have not in a while.
Yeah.
Let me ask. So you were a teacher,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Yeah. So what years did you teach? Where did you teach?
Okay. I went back into teaching. 1979. So there were a couple of years in between. And I was just doing a lot of things. A lot of it was political activity. At one point, I was the state chair of the Peace and Freedom Party.
Oh, wow.
And that was in the 80s, actually. And but I had gotten involved when I was still at UCLA there on the initiative with Peace and Freedom Party on getting the voting age lowered to 18.
Oh, wow.
Because the majority of Americans killed in the Vietnam War were below 21. Couldn't even, in most states, it was up to each state. Yeah, you could vote at 18 in Georgia, but you had to be 21 in California. And there were states that were 19 or states that were 20, but most of them were 21. But it was a state thing, and the state legislature at any point could have put it on a ballot and let people vote on it. They wouldn't do it. So we had an initiative petition. We got together some horribly insufficient amount of money to do it with, like $3,000 for needing the better part of 1 million signatures, valid signatures. And in those days, you didn't just get the signature. You were required, before you could submit the signatures, they would not even examine any signature unless it had the precinct number on it.
Had a what number?
The precinct number for the person on it. So you had to look up the precinct number. And that took more time than getting signatures did. Because particularly in LA, where there are certain streets where little city boundaries run in and out every couple blocks, it was like a 30-volume set of encyclopedias that you had to work with.
Wow. To
dig out. And first you got to decipher the handwriting. Then you got to use this thing, get the thing, and you got to put it in and code it correctly. We got around 100,000 signatures, but it wasn't enough to get it on the ballot, but certainly raised the issue very dramatically. I remember petitioning outside the theaters in Westwood there, and so it was a very good place to get it. And even to get Peace and Freedom already on the ballot to begin with, which is something I helped on back in late '67, you had to have 67,000 people register into the party. And I remember being outside those theaters in Westwood, and they were showing the film with Sidney Poitier, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, about some older Anglo family, and their daughter brings home a prospective boyfriend who's black. And boy, that was a great place to sign people up and all.
What did Peace and Freedom stand for?
Well, in those days, there were three major things. Civil rights movement, the farm worker movement, and the war in Vietnam were the three big kind of impetuses. The war in Vietnam probably being the heaviest of the three at that particular point in time, though the other two were very significant. And I remember we had some leaflets we were handing out with some of the statements. Hubert Humphrey had just gone down to Georgia, met with Lester Maddox, the governor of Georgia, who got elected governor of Georgia he was a restaurant owner, and he stood outside his restaurant passing out axe handles to his employees to beat up any blacks who tried to eat there. And so he got elected governor of Georgia. And then Hubert Humphrey goes down, needs support from Georgia, and walks arm in arm with him and tells the press, I'm glad to be in the presence of a good Democrat. I said, we're a big party. We got room for all of us. And, well, there's a lot of people who just didn't see it that way. And all the stuff, I remember Sergeant Shriver, who had was the head of one of the Job Corps kind of things. And he was talking about how good a thing that was, and they taken these people who couldn't get a job, who didn't have a high school diploma, and they gotten them up to where they had, and so many of them had been enlisted in the Army, and so many had already been killed in Vietnam. Well, that was not our destination of how you measure somebody's progress, how many people you've had killed in Vietnam, and stuff like that. There were other things too. A lot of the stuff with Cesar Chavez, his march on Delano to Sacramento and so forth, and just all the stuff going on in the South.
What motivated you to become so involved in these big movements?
Well, hard to say. It's I think I was generally horrified by what was going on in the war. I had a lot of background information that other people didn't have, like knowledge about what had happened during the French colonial regime and everything. Ho Chi Minh, when he first did the Declaration of Independence for Vietnam from France, which of course France didn't recognize, copied most of it out of the American Declaration of Independence, and all. And just, I probably a lot of things have just generally worked with me now. I'm not an angry person or something, but I'm a person who's probably pretty kind, who looks on, who wants to see everybody have a chance and so forth. So I think then it's kind of like on the thing with John Bury and everything, and the folks from Pacific Plaza Premier. I'm not a hostile person. I'm willing to work with somebody, but I'd like to see something that's good and workable come out of it. Occasionally, I didn't used to go to church. I'm probably pretty much in many ways almost an atheist, but I did remember writing a thing when they came out at Christmas time in the dorms at UC Riverside as a freshman. And they'd have a door decorating contest and stuff. Well, one of the things I did on one year was one year I drew a picture of an arm coming over a wall. It was just at the Berlin Wall situation. And, you know, that being horrified by how people were being treated there. And another time having a little sort of just a note on the door with my thoughts and beliefs about, you know, that I didn't know, I had no way to prove or disprove the existence of a God or gods, but recognized that having been in church as a kid, you know, I picked up some of those values, some of the good values about treating people like you'd like to be treated and stuff like that. I recognize that. You know.
Would you have any advice to younger generations who are picking up causes today?
Yeah. I think, if anything, be respectful of others, and try to be kind. You know, the golden rule kind of stuff. You know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
It's why you got into it in the first place.
Yeah.
And if you're going
After
to
my
abandon that.
dad passed away, I remember they had some services for him at church and stuff, and I began going. At first, my wife just pretty much went. And she's really Catholic, but she went because she was very close to my dad. And then I finally started going with her. And even got to the point where it's a tiny congregation, the English language congregations. If we get about 8 to 10 people there, that's about it.
Which church?
It's First United Methodist Church of Alhambra, the big one on the corner there. The Chinese congregation is much larger now. They had a Filipino congregation in there at one point. And so a couple of times they've asked me to give the sermon and stuff.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So you went from sort of being not going to church that much.
Yeah. And pretty much every week now. And I'm the only person I can recall since I've been doing that they've asked to give the sermon, and I have on maybe half a dozen occasions or something. And but it'll and they'll vary. They'll be about focusing on what's going on in Gaza, focusing on what's going on in Ukraine, focusing on just race relations and stuff like that. But all from a perspective that all fits in fairly well with the religious teachings and so forth. You know, so, but it's, I would say that I'm not a really strongly traditionally religious person, but I am respectful of what I consider the good aspects of it. There's a lot of bad stuff in
so
it.
what are the good
You look
aspects?
in the Bible, there are all sorts of stuff about the Amalekites and kill all of them and kill even the babies and the everything else, and make sure you don't leave any of them left. And then when one guy doesn't follow through right, they kill him too.
Right. Well, so what draws you to church now at this point in your life?
It's I think it's a sense of community is one thing. A sense of, and there are different religious perspectives and denominations, and I think I feel pretty comfortable in the one that I'm in, United Methodist, which is takes a fairly progressive stance on most issues. It's very good about race relations. It's very good about accepting gay people and stuff like that. I don't think there are any in our congregation now, but as a denomination, it's very open on these things.
So I keep asking you, you haven't gotten to it yet, but your teaching career.
Oh, yeah.
What did you teach and when?
My first job, in going back, I needed something that would pay more. I was working, actually, Peace and Freedom Party had set me up. How much was I getting? Maybe $65 a month.
Wow.
It wasn't much. I think it was $100 a month, then various things had to come out of it or something. But I just needed something that was going to pay a little more. I remember the office was down by MacArthur Park, and it had this little balcony, like a Mussolini balcony, overseeing the park on the south side. So I heard that LAUSD might be looking for teachers. I didn't even know much more about it. So I went down and asked. And they needed, there was a need for math teachers, and I could handle that. I'd had a lot of math, and you get a physics degree, you go through advanced applied analysis and everything else. And so I applied. I had to go back and get a recommendation from one of the professors whom I had been a TA under and under whom I'd done some lecturing and so forth. And I remember he wrote a real nice letter. He said, boy, I wish this guy was teaching my kids. And so they hired me. And I remember later the gal who was in the office who hired me said that was one of her main claims to fame, was hiring me, because I later led a major legal action for years against LAUSD.
What was that? What was that about?
That was about proper pay for teachers and writing in credit for training and experience, which state law Ed Code section 45028 specifies there will be uniform allowance for training and experience. So it doesn't matter what you're teaching for that given district. The pay is to be based upon how many post-BA units you have and how many years of teaching experience you have. And then there's different ways that's credited. For example, they were saying if you didn't teach 130 days, 135 in a school year, you wouldn't get credit for teaching that year. It didn't matter if you taught second semester one school year and first semester the next school year. That's less than half of each of those years, so they're not going to give you credit for any teaching experience at all, even though you've taught continuously for two straight semesters.
So that's what that litigation
this kind of stuff. And I remember one of the other people was, she was going to get a vocational nursing teaching job in school. And she had great experience. She'd been a chief operating room nurse at Kaiser Hospital for years, and then just wanted the kids were getting a little older, wanted to do something that was a little bit more stable and stuff. And they said, oh, great, we'll give you 5 years credit for your work experience. And then she signed up, came in, and presented all her stuff. And they said, oh, we noticed you just went back and got a bachelor's degree a year ago. There's a clause in the contract that says we can't give any work experience credit until after a bachelor's degree. So if you hadn't gone back and gotten more education, we could pay you way more on the salary scale. But because you did, I mean, this is the kind of crap we're fighting.
Yeah.
You know, and
it's not the golden rule.
Oh yeah. But eventually they tried to undermine our lawsuit by changing state law, everything. We still won on many of the issues in court. Wound up, the district finally said after the Judge Cooperman ruled for us on many of the issues, not all of them, but on many of them, and awarded back pay and interest on the back pay. And the district finally got in touch with us and said, well, are you willing to sit down and talk about this and undergo mediation? And I said, if you guys are willing to spring for the cost of the mediator, we will do it. And Ed Edelman, who's former county supervisor, his name is on the children's court down there and everything, was the mediator. And he came in, we had a couple of extensive sessions with him. He wound up, his proposal came down more on our side than it did on the districts where there were differences. Like we wanted at least, can't remember the exact number of years now, but I think in the end we were talking between 20 and 24 years back. One thing the district had said was, no credit for teaching experience that's over 10 years old. Well, a lot of women particularly leave teaching for a while, have kids, then come back. And so you want them to start at the bottom of the salary schedule again? These people have experience. And So we were really wanting unlimited, but in the end it came up, I think it was between 20 and 24 was the difference. The district was willing to go to 20. We were asking for 24. The mediator came down at 23 and so forth.
Okay.
So that's what's in the contract now. Part of the deal was on the settlement, they had to rewrite the contract because in the end, when we brought, I brought my own individual case first because I didn't have money to hire a lawyer. So but I had done a bunch of lawsuits.
So you were pro se.
What?
You were pro se without a lawyer.
Yeah. And I had done other lawsuits before. I've actually been parts of things that have struck down laws in about 30 states so far. But, and 2 federal statutes. So I knew pretty much how to do it. And so I went in and did it. And they ruled against me in Superior Court. They ruled against me in State Court of Appeal just on the grounds that I should have been in front of PERB, the Public Employment Relations Board, instead of in court. And they said the guy's got, has really good issues and everything, but, belongs over there. Well, later, PERB ruled they didn't have jurisdiction. It did belong in court. Well, my case had been, at that point, there were so many other people involved in the situation that one person said, I know some attorneys, we'll see if we can get them taken on a class action basis. And they said, well, you got to sign up 200 people, $500 a piece. So we got $100,000 to start with. So we did that. It was a lot of work, but we did that.
Yeah.
And then because these were all enshrined in the contract now, the district had agreed that all new incoming teachers in certain shortage fields would be not limited in how many post-BA units they could have. Where if you were coming in as a probationary teacher anywhere else, they limited you how far you could go. But it said in shortage fields, you can get whatever you've got. And I remember this is when I first got involved in the thing, is I heard about this, and I called up downtown because a guy came out to the school where I was teaching, and he was wondering about teaching, and he mentioned this to me. So I called downtown salary allocation. I said, does this mean I get to go up on the salary scale too? The answer was, oh no, you already work for us. You don't get that. Ed Code 45028,
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff.
So let me get back to, so you were teaching math.
Yeah.
Which school?
I was teaching at Stevenson. It was a junior high in those days, grades 7, 8, 9. They've now reconfigured to middle schools, so that middle level is 6, 7, 8.
Okay.
But at that time it was 7, 8, 9. And high schools were 10, 11, 12. Now high schools are 9 to 12 in LA. There are a few cases that are different. Eagle Rock has a combined junior, senior high and stuff.
Where was that school? Where is that school?
Okay, that's at Whittier in Indiana,
Okay.
in East LA.
Okay.
Essentially Boyle Heights, south part of Boyle Heights.
How long did you teach? Did you always teach math, or?
When I first went in there, I was hired as a math teacher. I did not know at which school I'd be teaching until the afternoon before. I did not know what I would be teaching in the way of subjects until about 10 minutes before school started. I was handed me a set of keys and said, do you know where the room is? That was literally my orientation.
Wow.
To teaching in LAUSD.
Okay.
So it was a lot of learning on the job for teaching kids at that level and so forth. I had 5 periods of individualized instruction remedial math lab on a 6-period day, 6th period being a conference. Well, I finally, after 5 or 6 weeks, gave up my conference period because they needed somebody to pick up a science class. And so then that was the only way I could get my take-home pay to break $800 a month. And that was for 10 months a year. The other 2 months you got nothing. So it was not lucrative, but there, my classes were ungraded. So there'd be 7th, 8th, and 9th graders all mixed in there. And it was just all kids who had real problems with math. And it was my job going in to figure out how am I going to make these kids learn. And I think I became a better teacher of remedial math than I did anything else. But I would be up nights working there. I remember I designed all these things like a times tables test. They went from 0 times 0 to 12 times 12, but they're all mixed together, backwards and forwards, 7 times 6, 6 times 7, all mixed together. Everything was on there. And they're printed in groups of 10, and all you had to do is write the answer. And they had 5 minutes to do it. That's 3 seconds a problem. And so you can find out pretty quick what they know and what they don't know. And then I have kids working on just how to do this, what does multiplication mean? How does this work? And so forth. But I had one kid, I remember he could only get about 7 right at the beginning in 5 minutes. In about a month, he was 93 right out of 100 in 5 minutes, and so forth. And
how did you do this?
Well, they got the test every day.
Okay.
I had to grade them all every day.
Okay.
So it was a lot of work. I didn't get a lot of sleep. But then we would do other things too. How do fractions work? And I would, what I finally developed was I'd draw pictures on the board. I drew a lot of pictures on the board. Mm-hmm. I'd draw 2 apples, plus sign, I'd draw another apple, equals, 3 apples, no problem. Okay. 2 apples and a pear, equals. Finally, somebody comes up with 3 fruits. Well, what did you have to do that? You had to change the name, because you can't add the number parts together till the name is the same. And then anybody knows the name of the bottom part of a fraction? There's always one kid in class who knows denominator. Well, what does it mean? Most math teachers have no clue. It comes from Latin. D, nomen, which the nomen part, in Spanish, nombre, in English, name. It's the name of the thing. Denominator. So what you gotta have the names be the same. So you can't add the top parts to the names of this thing.
Oh, okay.
So we would do a lot of stuff like this, and I'd draw pictures of quarts and pints and all this stuff, and get kids working together.
This is where your history, humanities is
everything was in there. Yeah. And then we'd go into, all right, this comes from Latin. Who speaks Latin today? Well, the priest, nobody else, what are the 5 modern languages that come from it? Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Romanian, and so forth, French, So they get a little bit of everything. And I remember I used to do that sort of stuff when later at Belmont High School, as the assistant principal in charge of counseling.
You were?
Okay. Yeah, that was later. But they had a tardy sweep thing that they developed there. All the kids in the late class had to get sent down to this room. Yeah. And then, of course, most of the people, they just sit there and do nothing. They got a lesson from me. So we'd learn about that kind of stuff. And I had kids come up to me and say, boy, it's the best tardy sweep I've ever had.
And your lessons would be about what?
Yeah, they'd be frequently math.
Okay.
Related kind of things. But I would teach all kinds of things. I wound up teaching advanced placement U.S. history. I taught calculus. I taught physics. I taught bonehead remedial math. I taught economics, honors econ. Um, I'm sure a bunch of other. Oh, I taught biology, but that was the days when they didn't. They didn't really care much what your credential was in the old days.
Okay.
You know, I remember the only thing I taught everything they asked me to teach, except one time down in junior high in South Central. They asked me would I teach cadet corps, which was junior high ROTC. And I smiled and I said, I don't think my credential covers that.
You know? Yeah, actively.
Yeah. But I remember, and of course, you can be in any kind of classroom.
Yeah.
Teaching on an emergency basis, you have to cover somebody else or something. I have taught bilingual math.
In which languages?
Yeah, it was bilingual in the sense of at Belmont High School, we had kids come from all over the world. And kids were still pouring in, and so they wanted to open.
Today.
Yes, yeah. One of them just most recently is one of my former students who has a job very similar to what I had, assistant principal for secondary counseling services. And she's had a battle with cancer herself, and we remain in close touch with her. And many of my other students, I remember when I was, gosh, what was it? Some birthday party after I retired. I might have been 65, 70, something like that. A lot of my former students got together with me, and some did as late as, I think the last one was, my wife threw one for my 75th, and a bunch of my former students were there for that too. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but they're, one's principal, another one that was also a principal and is now in high administration downtown. There are architects, all kinds of people in there. Many are teachers, and you know, some of them have thanked me for setting them on the right path to things. But that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask. You know, living in Alhambra for so long, how is it the same? How has it changed? What are your concerns? What are your hopes for the future?
There are a lot more apartment buildings than there used to be. And downtown has changed a lot. When I was a kid, there were movies and stuff like that. There was the Garfield Theater, there was the El Rey Theater, and several others. And you'd go, that's where you'd go on Saturday. Your parents would give you a quarter to go down there, and you could spend half the day at the movies. You get a double feature and a zillion cartoons, and there was enough bubble gum on the floor to resole your shoes coming out and everything. But I remember at El Rey Theater, they had a little contest there, right about, I can't remember what the subject was, but I wrote about why I couldn't have a dog or animals. And because my next brother down had asthma. So the prize was I got a dog. Like, did you read it? But just there were a lot more just like storefront type businesses then. They were a lot more vibrant in those days. You didn't have online shopping. That's how you shopped.
A lot of mom and pop businesses.
Yeah, a lot of little mom and pops, and department stores, Vandermaas, where you go up and get your Boy Scout uniform up on the second floor and so forth. My mom loved Lieberg's. I don't know that she bought much of anything there, but she loved to go in and see the stuff. And those kind of businesses, we didn't have Costco's. You didn't have Walmart type businesses in those days. You didn't have Targets or anything. So they tended to be smaller businesses, but they tended to draw a lot of traffic. I don't remember there being a lot of parking lots. I guess we just parked on the street. I don't really remember. And there used to be a lot of things I think it was more bike friendly when I was a kid. Well, first off, there were a lot more kids and you're on bicycles. I remember being down at 1021 South Cordova Street. I'd ride my bicycle up to the main post office on Bay State to get a copy of the newest 3-cent commemorative stamp that had just been issued or something. And you felt safe doing that. Nowadays, you're kind of taking your life in your hands going out on a bicycle. But
cars just travel a lot faster, or just more cars?
Well, there's just it seems to me like there's more traffic. They say it's actually reduced a little bit on Main Street from what it was at its peak, but that may just be because it's narrower in places, and they've got the bus stops right there. When the bus stops there, effectively there's only one lane left in that direction, because the bus stops aren't in the recessed areas, they're on the outside areas. And that does make it a little complicated. They have the medians now on a lot of parts of Main Street, in the downtown area, particularly on East Main, they've got some there. The dividing things, which offers more safety, but at the same time makes the lanes a little narrower.
Did you ride your bike on the sidewalk or on the street as a kid?
Oh, well, I did both, mostly probably in the street. I mean, technically it's against the law to ride it on the sidewalk. It still is, but sometimes it's the safest thing to do. So I don't regret if somebody is doing it. I understand why. And yeah.
Other thoughts about Alhambra?
There were a lot more open spaces in the city when I was a kid. There was the old airport track. It was still just the old airport. And the area right north of that, north of Valley there, was just this massive weed-filled parking lot.
So why is it important?
Not parking lot, just a weed-filled lot. I remember taking my bike and riding through this dirt path to go to Crawford's store down at the corner there.
What did you enjoy these just sort of random open spaces?
Oh yeah.
And why?
And then I don't remember what year they first opened the golf course. I remember one of my buddies, Art Rudd, he and his family played golf, but it was just 9 holes then when they first opened it. Yeah.
Why is it important to have these sort of random open spaces?
Well, I think I don't know that you need random, but I sure like to see some grass around the house and some bushes and some trees. And I think kids ought to have a place to play. There's a condominium right next to where I live now. And there, the kids are out there. It's kind of got the driveway drops down about half a level. So for the kids to play there means they're out in this concrete driveway bouncing a ball off this wall. That to me is not sufficient place to play. Yes, there are some parks in the area. Story Park is a couple blocks away. Linderaxa Park, which doesn't have a lot of parks facilities, but is open, grassy area, and you can go out and run around on it, throw a ball around on it, run your dog on it, and this kind of stuff. But I think it's nice for kids to have that. think at almost every place I've ever been, unless I was living in, when I lived in apartments when I was going to college, there weren't places like that. But then I wasn't there raising kids or being a kid. I was there studying and doing other things, working and stuff like that. So I can understand that the other kind of housing is needed too. But I sure like to see places that are kid friendly. I really have a lot of sympathy for and admiration for people who are raising kids.
Did you raise kids?
None of my own.
Okay.
I was married once before. That package came with two kids, both in high school at the time, both now deceased. And then my wife for the last 30 some years, that came with three adult children, now 57, 58, and 59. So I didn't get to be involved with them in kid stuff. But I just have a lot of admiration for people who are putting the time and effort into doing that.
Yeah.
And I know it's so many people now, you just look, everything's damn expensive now. Yeah.
Well, is there, in conclusion, anything that we haven't talked about do you want to hit on? Or
I think we've hit on most of the stuff. I'm glad to see the present city council, I think, is very receptive to listening to things. And that's good because I remember when I think my first real contact when I was back living in the city was getting a parking ticket for parking overnight and not knowing that there was a rule about that or that you had to buy this parking permit. I think I maybe had some inkling about it, but I remember looking at the neighbor's car and there was no parking sticker on the rear, which is where you would expect it, because you'd expect somebody doing enforcement is going to drive along on the same side of the street as the cars are parked on. And in fact, the municipal code specified that the parking sticker had to be on the back window. But then the instructions were to put them on the front window. I finally brought this to the city council's attention and they finally cleaned that up. But, you know.
So that was your first civic?
Well, that wasn't the first one. That was later on.
Oh, okay.
But I was thinking, should I go down to City Hall and talk to him about it? And nobody's going to listen to me down there. You know? Well, they do listen. And that to me was something I would not have anticipated originally. But yes, they do listen down there. And they do take into account their hands are tied sometimes. They may not go along with what you want or something, but they do listen.
Yeah, and do you think that's a real difference between, say, living in Alhambra versus in LA?
Yeah, well, LA is so damn big, and each city council district is larger than the city of Alhambra. And I remember going down there one time with somebody on some issue. Was something in San Pedro area. And you just didn't really feel that you were being given a good reception down there. That people, and I think it's probably pretty much the size of the operation.
Yeah.
And now things are much different. In LA, city council members have staff, big staff. Here, city council members have no staff. If anything, it might be helpful if they did have some staff, because there's some person they can direct to go out and get me information on this. They tend to be very reliant on district, city staff, because there is no other staff. And most of these people here do have, the job doesn't pay much, nothing like city council member in LA pays.
Yeah, I think it's like $700 a month or something.
Yeah, it's a
which would have been great for you. In the
for
70s.
me. Yeah, but it would be helpful if there were some staff time. That would be an expense and so forth. And so I don't know whether the city wants to spring for that kind of stuff. But that you look at state legislature, they have staffs and so forth. The city council, board of supervisors, they all have staff. But in this size city, I think it's a problem with the city size. In a big city where each council district is way bigger than the city of Alhambra, then you've got to have some staff to support you.
All right, Lou. Well, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Mike.
I appreciate your time.
Okay. If there's any more you want to get anytime, let me know.
Thank you so much. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
All right.